Greetings. After showing Fischer-Trifunovic, in an Open Ruy Lopez, Black played the bad EXT4, I want to show a game in another Open Ruy Lopez in which Black doesn't play that bad EXT4 move. As usual, I'll be using the chess.com analysis board with Stockfish 12 chess engine. The game is one played in November of 2015 between Marie Sebag and Maria Muzychuk in Reykjavik, Iceland. Reykjavik is where Bobby Fischer defeated Boris Spassky in 1972 for the World Chess Championship. Anyway, the game, being an Open Ruy Lopez, began as a Ruy Lopez, or Spanish game. Black put the question to the bishop: will we see an exchange Ruy Lopez, or will we see the bishop retreat? The bishop retreated. Okay. Knight out, castles, allowing Black to take this pawn if he wants to. If he does, it's an Open Ruy Lopez. If he doesn't, it's not. Usually, White lets Black take it if he wants to. Usually, Black doesn't take it. But here we have an Open Ruy Lopez. D4. Black kicks the bishop back to B3 and plays D5. This is where Trifunovic played EXD4, which opened the E file for White to attack along. Here, Black plays D5, and White captures on E5. So White gets her pawn back. Sebag gets her pawn back. And we continue with book moves. I will point out that this C3 move is one that some people might want to avoid. They might want to play bishop E3 or knight B to D2 because they might want to avoid the Dilworth variation, which runs something like this. And sacrifice the knight. And after the trades, White has taken a pair of minor pieces. Black has taken a rook and pawn. Usually the side that has taken the pair of minor pieces is better. Usually it's better to get the minor pieces than to get the rook and pawn. So White usually doesn't mind this. Stockfish calls this position dead even. Stockfish also has Black play bishop takes instead of knight takes, although of course after the trades, it's the exact same position. But White did not worry about the Dilworth variation. White played C3, and Black didn't play bishop to C5. Black played bishop to E7. And the book moves continue, still in book. This is what an Open Ruy Lopez looks like. If you want to see it from the Black side, this is what an Open Ruy Lopez looks like. If you think this looks fine for Black, then you might want to try playing it as Black. And White moves the knight to B3, eyeing the square D4, also covering C5. And now knight B to D4. I want to point out that White actually can play knight F to D4. It's actually playable. It's actually playable. It looks like it gives up a pawn. Well, the problem is, after F3, this knight has to go somewhere. Say it goes to D6. Then knight to C5, attacks the queen, and two knights are attacking the bishop. So after the queen moves, bye-bye bishop. So the knight can't go to D6. Then it goes to F6, Then queen to e2 attacks the knight. And if the knight moves away, then this bishop dies. There's a queen attacking it, and there's a knight attacking it. Bye-bye bishop. So that's a problem. How about if knight plays knight to g5? There are three possibilities. This is the third of them. Here's the fourth one, c5. So we've ruled out this one. We've ruled out this one. Now how about knight to g5? Well, that loses too. A quick bishop takes knight, and the bishop has to recapture, or black will be down a piece. But once the bishop recaptures, then it's no longer covering c5, and knight to c5, there we go, attacking the queen, double attack on the bishop again. So when the queen moves, bye-bye bishop. So knight there won't work. So these three are ruled out. What about there? Well, it turns out this gets very complicated. This gets very complicated. And I won't go through all the complications. White does get at least his pawn back with a good position. So, for instance, queen up, attacking the knight. And let's say the knight moves there. Then you can't really get away with this, because now this knight's pinned. This knight now is pinned. So if you try taking the bishop, bye-bye queen. Okay. So you can't really get away with knight takes knight and hope to win that way. You can play rook to e1. Now the bishop's attacked 3 times. And if the bishop retreats, remember this one's defended by the knight, well then bishop takes pawn, white's gotten his pawn back. And he has a good game. Now it doesn't have to go quite like that. In fact, knight to g6 is probably not black's best move. But when you go through various variations, you find that, yeah, white's at least going to get his pawn back, at least, and have a good game. But it gets really complicated. I won't go through them all now. So white can indeed play knight f to d4, but white played knight b to d4. And then black took, and white took. And black played c5, attacking the knight, so the knight just zapped the bishop, which gives white the advantage of the 2 bishops. And then f3 kicks the knight away. And then white played a4, giving away a free pawn. Black can take the pawn. Well, not exactly. After f4, the queen can't go there, check, because of this pawn. And the queen can't go there, check, because of that bishop. So the queen can't escape the attack and give check to gain a tempo so as to then pull the knight away from being attacked. So after the queen moves, the knight's going to die. White will take the knight. So if black takes the pawn, well, that's no good. So white doesn't have to defend the pawn here. It's already indirectly defended. You can go ahead and play a4. This would directly defend it. f4 would directly defend it. Bishop to f4 would directly defend it. Rook to e1 would directly defend it. But as it is, it's indirectly defended. If black takes the pawn, something bad will happen to black. Something sufficiently bad that, no, he doesn't really want to take that pawn. That's indirect defense. When, yeah, okay, it doesn't look like anything's defending the pawn, but if black takes it, something bad happens to him. That's indirect defense. Look over. Now white trades pieces, so white no longer has the advantage of the two bishops. You look at the bishops remaining, they're opposite colored bishops. Those are the only minor pieces left, opposite colored bishops. But all the major pieces are still on the board, both queens and all the rooks. So there's a lot of play left in this. It's not just something where you'd look at it and say, oh, I think this will be a draw because you know, they're opposite colored bishops. Opposite colored bishops do tend to be drawish, but there's a lot of play left here. And now f4 does directly defend e5 pawn and also attacks black's bishop, so the bishop retreats. And now white trades pawns on b5. Okay. Next, king to h1. Now, I don't know exactly why that's a good move here. I certainly don't know why Stockfish thinks it's the best move here. In general, if you have your king on this dark square and your opponent has a dark squared bishop or queen or both, you might be scared of checks along that diagonal. You might be scared of pins along that diagonal. And you might just move your king over to h1 to avoid any possible checks or pins along that diagonal. Certainly that's done a lot against a Sicilian defense. I don't know exactly why it was done here. Now black plays d4. White takes, and you might think that black would take with the pawn to get a nice centralized passed pawn. Well, the problem with that is bishop to b3, pinning black's queen. The best black can do is move the rook up so that he'll lose an exchange instead of losing a queen. Well, but queen to f3 attacks it twice. Now white's threatened to win a full rook. And if black defends with this rook, white has a beautiful saving move, rook to a8. Now this rook is pinned, so it doesn't actually defend the d5 rook. If black takes the rook, then bishop takes rook, pins the queen. It also hits the rook, but I think pinning the queen is better. That won't work. So he can't play rook takes rook. That won't work. What else can he do? If he just makes a move to make it white's move, well then bishop takes rook, pins the queen. Pins the queen. And the rook can't take because it's pinned. And if queen takes bishop, queen takes queen check, the rook can't take because it's pinned. So we go back. That rook to 8 move is a saving move. And all of that means, along with this bishop to b3 move, all of that means that black can't take with the pawn. All right, well, how about if he takes with the rook? That looks like a tempo move, too. It attacks the queen. It attacks white's queen. It has the same problem, or a similar problem, bishop to b3. Now, if black takes white's queen, it's not check. Bishop takes queen is check. And after the king moves, white takes the rook, and white's up a full rook. That won't work. Okay, if white pins, the best black can do is c4. And then queen takes rook, pawn takes bishop, and white has won an exchange. And this is pretty much a 2 against, it's 2 against 1 is pretty much 1 against 1. This pawn isn't doing much good for black. It isn't doing black much good. And white on the king side has a 4 against 3 with a protected passed pawn. And I don't know if I mentioned this yet. When we refer to protected passed pawns, we usually have in mind passed pawns that are defended by their own pawns, not passed pawns that are defended by their own pieces. but that are defended by ones that are defended by their own pawns. That's a protected passed pawn. So that's a protected passed pawn because it's protected by its own pawn. So not only does white have a 4-on-3 pawn majority on the king side, he has a protected passed e pawn. And this guy doesn't do much for black. White's up in exchange, so white should win this. So there's no taking either way. So why did black do this? Black ends up playing c4, which is good. Blocks the diagonal. But was all that done so that black would be able to use that square? Sometimes you see that. Or to use that diagonal. Sometimes you see sometimes you see pawn sacrifices made in order to clear squares or to clear diagonals. There's a Fischer game versus Robert Byrne from the US Championship in 1963-64 that I often show my students, in which Fischer does that. He gives up a pawn, sacrifices it, in order to open up a diagonal for his bishop to attack Byrne's king. You sometimes see that. So did Muzychuk give up the pawn in order to use this square with her queen? It's a nice square sitting in front of a backward pawn. The queen can just sit there. Maybe, but that's not actually the reason. White plays b3. Black plays bishop to c5, and white can't take the bishop because of the pin. So black is going to get the pawn back. White plays pawn takes pawn. Black gets that pawn, that first pawn back with tempo by attacking the white queen. The white queen escapes to b1, and then black plays bx-c4. To get the second pawn back. Black couldn't have played queen takes because of that pin, protected by the queen, pinning the queen against the king. And black couldn't have played rook takes pawn because of the same pin, and it's not quite as bad. Here it's not a queen getting pinned, but still, black's going to lose in exchange. Well, that's not good for black. So it had to be pawn takes pawn. It had to be pawn takes pawn. Now white plays rook to a5, which attacks black's bishop. Black defends the bishop and also gets onto the long diagonal, hitting g2. And now you might think that if black could get this move in, the queen and the rook would be hitting g2, and that could be strong. White played bishop to d1, so that now if black plays rook to d2, the bishop will just go to f3, blocking the diagonal and attacking the queen. So there's no real attack on g2. And now black played queen to c7, a little move that attacks the rook. It attacks the rook. Notice when your pieces are attacked. Notice when your pieces are attacked. White plays queen to b5, defending the rook. And now this bishop is threatened. The queen and rook are attacking it, only the queen is defending it. So black parries the threat by playing bishop to b6. And now the rook's attacked again. White plays rook to a6. And now the bishop's attacked twice again. So black plays rook to b8, defending it twice again. There's a lot of this thrust counter thrust. Thrust and parry or thrust counter thrust. A lot of attack and defend or attack and counterattack. You see that a lot in chess. One player will attack, the other will defend. Or one player will attack and the other will counterattack. You see a lot of that in chess. So now that bishop is adequately defended. And white plays bishop to f3. which Stockfish says is excellent, and which controls this nice long diagonal, including that square. But it kind of looks as though black could play rook takes pawn. And it looks like it. Oh, but maybe that pawn is indirectly defended. Maybe it's indirectly defended. Bishop check. Discovering an attack on the rook. And after the king moves, you take the rook. Oh, so maybe black couldn't take the pawn. Oh, but wait a minute now. Wait a minute now. How about if black does this? Now white's rook is under attack, and white's queen is under attack. Ew. Ew. And if white saves the queen in some lackadaisical way, then the rook's going to come in check. And yeah, the queen can come back here, the rook can come back here, but they'll both be taken, and it'll be mate. Pack rank mate. So white has to be careful about what he does here. White has to be careful about what he does here. And there's a saving move. Lovely saving move. Rook to A8. We saw that earlier with the pin of the queen. Now we see it here. Same move, rook to A8. Lovely move, and it's a saving move. Now, the black rook can't take the white queen because the black rook is pinned. If black says, okay, I'll take your rook, well, then black will get checkmated. Back rank mate. Okay. Well, how about if black takes this rook? Well, then white takes. And now black can't take this rook because white will checkmate him. Oh. Black has to stop the mate, and then white can save his rook, possibly by playing rook takes c4. So white has that beautiful saving move. So in fact, when white plays bishop to f3, so that this rook no longer directly defends that pawn, still that pawn is indirectly defended. It is, it's indirectly defended. Because of that saving move, rook to a8. Okay, so black played c3, and white played rook to c1. Well, once again, you might ask, can the rook just take the pawn? And the answer is yes, it can. Yes, it can. But what happens? Well, again, we have rook to a8. If black takes this pawn on f4, then rook to a8. And if black takes, then queen to d5 check. And a king to the corner, then queen takes check, and queen back, and queen takes, and then rook takes pawn. And Stockfish tells me that this is a dead even game, and I believe it. We're down to one pair of rooks, one rook each, and opposite colored bishops, and 3 pawns against 3 pawns, and they're all on the king side. They're all on the same side of the board. I believe this is a draw. I can believe this is a draw very easily. I can believe this is a draw very easily. I can believe this is a draw very easily. So going back. To queen to d5 check. The only question is what happens if he plays king to h8. Queen to f8. Sorry, the only question is what if he plays queen to f8? Well, then we get the rook. And you can't seriously want to go to a late square when white has the queen and the bishop on late squares. If you go queen to d8, then queen to a3 check, you'll pick up this pawn. And Stockfish says it's even. I believe it. I believe it. If king to e7, well, you still have an even game, except, well, it's actually a little better for white. It's actually a little better for white. And I can't really say I understand why white's better after rook to e1. I can't really say I understand that. But I can see why it's even after queen to a3 check. White's going to pick up this pawn. And I can easily see it's being a draw after that. Once again, there was that rook to a8 saving move. So yes, black can take on f4, but once again, the saving move, rook to a8, comes into play. Black actually moved the king over, which does away with the queen to d5 check line, right? Does away with that forking idea. White played rook to a8 anyway. And now, after it's having been a saving move 2 or 3 times before, now it's a losing move. And I'm not showing this in order to embarrass the white player here. I'm showing this because I think how the game finishes is instructive. And I want to show instructive games. So black takes, white takes, black moves back. And in moving back, this rook has cleared this square. So now the bishop can get through to e3 to fork f4 and c1. The black rook, which a moment ago was up here, remember? The black rook is now defending against this back rank mate by moving back, because now it has moved back. It's stopping the mate. So it's stopping mate. It's attacking the bishop. And it is now out of the way of the bishop to get to e3. So that's a move that does a lot. And white doesn't have much choice other than f3 for his bishop. He could try, obviously he can't go to b7. He could try c6. He could try bishop to c6, but then bishop to e3. And the rook can't move up because then there'll be a back rank mate. The queen can come back and rook takes queen mate. I can't have that. So the rook has to move over. If the rook moves over to defend the f pawn, well then c2. The bishop guards c1, so this pawn is going to promote, and white's going to have to give up a rook. So bishop to c6 won't work. Bishop to c6 won't work. How about bishop to d5? That actually has the virtue of blocking the d file, so there's no back rank mate threat. But then the bishop does move to e3. If the rook moves to f1, then c2. This pawn's going to promote. White's going to have to give up a rook. If the rook moves to c2 to block the pawn, then rook to b8. And white's going to have to make sure that rook doesn't come back here to deliver a back rank mate. So white's going to have to play queen to f1. But then rook to b2 is a very strong move. White can't really trade because then this move is going to end the game. Doesn't take, what can he do? Well, queen to d1 defends the rook, also defends the bishop. Then black can just start munching pawns. Black can start munching pawns. And it's hard to see anyone but black winning this. It's hard to see anyone but black winning this. White's in a tight spot. So the rook made its move back and did all of those things at once. The bishop pretty much had to retreat to f3, and then bishop to e3 forked the f pawn and the c1 rook. At least the bishop covers d1, so there's no mate threat at the moment. No back rank mate threat against white at the moment from that rook. And white played rook to c2. Black then played bishop takes f4. And now that this e-pawn doesn't have its support, there used to be a pawn there supporting it, it's no longer a protected passed pawn, and now it's much more vulnerable than it used to be to black's pieces. Much more vulnerable to capture now. White played e6, and now rook to b8. And again, white really can't let the rook come in here. So he moves over to d5, but that lets the rook get there. Okay. And then bishop to d1 because the queen on d5 defends it. Ah, well, okay. But this is really bad for white. h6. That does away with white's back rank mate threat, which was that. It would have forced the rook to come back, or forced the queen to block, and then there could have been a queen trade. It does away with any back rank mate ideas white might have. And then queen to d3 allows queen to d6, a very nice move. Very nice move. Stockfish prefers queen to c4. But queen to d6 is winning. It's winning. If white trades queens, well, then there's no avoiding losing the bishop. And white can't at least get the pawn, because if he does, then he's checkmated. White can't even take the pawn. And white can't move here because that's checkmate. Bishop covers that square h2. So white has to play g3. But it doesn't really help all that much. Rook takes bishop check, and the king has to move up. And then rook to d2 check. You have to trade rooks, and now that guy's going to become a queen. And the white pawn is no good. The bishop will just take it. So black wins this game. And we can look at queen to c4 and see what Stockfish likes about it. So Stockfish likes queen to c4. Stockfish likes queen to c4. And we can try a check. But now what? Now what? Maybe e7? Well, the trouble is, that's mate. What can white do? White can't take the queen because of check and mate. What can white do? Queen to f3 is a try. But white's losing this. According to Stockfish, there's mate in 11. I don't expect a human to see mate in 11. I don't expect expect a human being to see mate in 11. Now, maybe queen d4, which now threatens to take the rook, because the bishop pinned against the king does not really defend the rook. It also threatens queen e1 with mate to follow. This is really, really, really bad. Stockfish gives rook to f2. Okay. Rook to f2. c2. Now what? Now what? Rook to f1, says Stockfish. And then it's queen takes. This is just horrible because the bishop falls and black's going to get a queen. And white can try to promote, but black stops it. Black stops it. And soon it's going to be mate. Soon it's going to be mate. There we go. But way back here, way back, that ended the game because it forced at least the win of the bishop, and black's still just crushing white. So, end of the game. So, take a quick look at the opening again. This is the opening, the Open Ruy Lopez. Open Ruy Lopez, and this is what an Open Ruy Lopez looks like. This is what an Open Ruy Lopez looks like. This is what it looks like. And if you think you're fine here as black, okay, play the Open Ruy Lopez. It's playable. I think I should go back a couple of moves. So if you think this is fine for black, go ahead, play it. Okay. So that was Marie Sebag versus Maria Muzychuk from 2015. It was an Open Ruy Lopez, but it was an Open Ruy Lopez without ext5, which opened the file for Fischer in his game against Trifunovic. Okay. All right, that's it. So, as always, try to win, but more than that, try to play well.